we'll make it easy. I want to send a very special thank you to everybody for being here. It's really showing your dedication to the improvement of our craft by being here on a Sunday afternoon just to listen to us talk. We are here to talk about making big wins for small communities through transportation planning. But one thing I wanted to do quickly is do a show of hands. How many local officials do we have here in the audience? Any? Mostly just transportation consultants and engineering consultants, agency folks? You? Well, welcome and thank you for being here. So I come to this conversation with the perspective of being somebody who wants to live a more multimodal life, but am also a mom. So I wanted to see perspectives from other people. When I talk about safety, I think of it from a context of our most vulnerable users. I wanted to ask, how many of you ride a bike or walk daily to your activities? 2 folks? Do you move around easily without a car in your neighborhoods? Yes? No? What if you were letting your children? Could your children move around safely in your neighborhoods where you live and work?
Take that as a no.
I knew
You
have children. What about your aging parents? This is a national crisis, as we've got 4 generations in the workforce now. We've got a very heavily weighted age pyramid at the top, and we've got a lot of folks who are trying to figure out how to help their parents get around safely without having to be their designated driver. Is that a concern that hits any of your households?
See some head shake.
They should have put some coffee out there, y'all. So we're going to talk about creating safer communities as the catalyst for community desirability, physical health and well-being, community pride. And this is sort of these are supposed to be, not ordinal, other than when we're talking about dimensions of safety, more increasing safety versus lesser safety. The increasing safety we find brings more desirability to our neighborhoods and recurring long-term investment, whereas lesser safe areas, you see lack of investment over time and increasing obesity, asthma, environmental health concerns. From our perspective, when we're talking about creating these safer, more desirable communities, what we're talking about is a great win in the beginning is by focusing on the most vulnerable users. Then you can create a very secure, stable infrastructure network that can then be built upon for other considerations. So your freight traffic, your emergency evacuation. If you're looking at these folks, your non-motorized users, your youth and your elderly as your foundation, that gives us a more consistent, efficient, effective lens for creating long-term investments. So I wanted to ask, why would we focus on safety? In our work at Foresight, in our transportation and traffic group, we are focusing on safety as a way of building our practice in transportation and traffic, specifically around the tenets of the SS4A program and programs like that. That way we can create short-term investments that make long-term improvements. And ideally, it's lower cost improvements that create undercapitalized wins, and underutilized state and federal funding can often be found if there is an underlying plan in place in the beginning. So I wanted to bring Eric and Doug into the conversation to talk about their perspectives of how we're developing a safe system approach and the underlying tenets of a safe system approach and how that can be utilized in your plan development for your communities over time.
Well, I guess I'll start. Can everybody hear me? Okay. I have a volume button, so if you need me to go up or down, let me know. We'll try to do this from here instead of from a microphone. So good afternoon. Thank you all for being here on a Sunday afternoon outside of the state of Georgia. It's amazing that you all came for this. In terms of where we're going with this conversation, it's really about focusing on how you can take one simple element and make it the star of your planning process. And that star is safety. And it's always been the key North Star, if you will, of many agencies, state DOTs, the Federal Highway Administration, forever and a day. But they've always been focused really from a very high level and very conceptual level of overall metrics and statistics and things of that nature, which, when you get down to the everyday person, to the smaller communities, there really hasn't been a focus on safety. One, because they really haven't had resources to do it. That's bottom line. And what's really changed in the past couple of years with the last federal reauthorization was that resources have started to trickle down to where it's not just the state DOT or the Federal Highway Administration looking at safety. There is opportunity for communities to look at it. And so they can take that to be kind of their North Star as well. I think as we were talking about, safety is so important because it impacts everything you do and everything that happens in your lifetime. How many people pick where they live because they felt safe? You see a good amount of people, particularly, thinking about that first thing when they look at where they buy and invest. So if you're a community and people think or perceive that you're unsafe, you're at a decided economic development disadvantage right away. So safety has to be this thing that you think about in the lens of how you build and plan for your community. Because if you don't, you're never going to get past the first door or for people when they're making decisions to live there. Or for folks like Doug and I who might want to invest in your community. Because if people don't feel safe there, why am I going to invest my money there? So safety has to be that lens that you look through in terms of how you build and plan around communities. And like I say, the good news is that there is opportunities, and there's a whole session that's going on concurrently. So good news is you're going to hear a lot about SS4A. So you didn't even have to go and skip the next session because we're going to hit a little bit about it. And why we hit on this is because SS4A is probably one of the most unique things that has happened in the federal reauthorization program in the 30 plus years I've been in transportation. And you go, well, Eric, why is that? It's money and it's talking about safety. You just said it was the North Star. Everybody's been looking at this stuff forever and a day. But it's the first time that local governments have really been a direct recipient of federal money, not having to go through a state DOT or some other branch to get money. They could be a direct recipient. I worked for Federal Highway, as Emily mentioned, for many years. When I was there, we had 52 clients at the Federal Highway Administration. Now they have over 3,000 because of this one particular program and others like it, like RAISE and a couple of others. So we've had this idea of safety. Folks always think about it. They kind of try to qualify it. And then now we've got the opportunity to help smaller communities. If you look at the distribution of money, there's been 3 rounds so far of Safe Streets for All money. There's a decided split between rural and urban communities, large cities, large counties, and small communities, ranging from folks that are 3,000 to 300,000 in size. So the federal government has been very interested in seeding money across all these spectrums to be able to start helping people look at their community, be able to start making safety their North Star and looking at it from a perspective of building that culture in there. Because what are those benefits? As we talked about, health benefits, economic development benefits, let me say that again, economic development benefits. Even if you aren't the Uber planner or you're dealing with politics, I can tell you the one transcending thing that you will find in any community is that you want to have a vibrant and prosperous community. What's that mean? 2 words: economic development. So this is a really interesting program that came out of the infrastructure reauthorization last time. And it's one of the largest investments in safety, where there's over $1 billion available for communities to go after implementation funding. One of the unique things, though, about this program is that it said, hey, we've got all this money for implementation, but before we go and say, hey, we're going to scatter money to the wind, we want you to get consensus in your community about what are the most important things that you want to look at and that you want to improve. And we want to see a plan. And we want to make sure that you've thought out how best to spend money to deal with safety and to buy into the idea that Vision Zero should be a reality in your community. Everybody heard of Vision Zero? Okay, well, that's good. You know, Vision Zero is really, I think as we call it, a noble goal. Yes. In the sense of trying to make sure that we can eliminate fatal and severe crashes in communities over a period of time. Most communities tend to do that over a 10 to 30 year period, depending on where they are. But it really kind of creates this incentive for you to start working as a community to look at the safety issues in your community. You know, most people can inherently know, hey, that intersection's bad, or this roadway's had a lot of issues, but we haven't documented it and we haven't thought about how would we go about fixing it. Because one, usually your community doesn't have the resources to fix it if they did. And two, some people are really afraid to even touch the topic of safety because they think if they address it or talk about it, they create a liability, which is far from the truth. So one of the things that we've been doing is working with communities is to start going, hey, here's a revenue stream to fix a lot of things that are in your community that help you become either perceived more safe or actually will be able to document that you're doing things in a safer manner. And so SS4A has been a mechanism for people to start that safety conversation in communities all across the country, whether it's a rural county, whether it's a small town or village, or a large complex urban area, or even regions. We see those are having things. The Atlanta Regional Commission has worked on those sorts of plans. We see even in Georgia, the River Valley Regional Commission applied for and received SS4A funding to do a regional plan for the regional commission boundaries. What's that, 11 counties?
Actually 14.
14 counties.
That's Southwest Georgia, if you don't know.
So there's this opportunity to do that in terms of what, you know, funding is there. And that funding is critical because, you know, even if you don't have the well-intentioned heart of, I want to do better by my community, most people will go, well, this gets me an opportunity to get into the funding queue and I can get real money and real dollars. And, you know, he's the politician, but I'll say, you know, they like to cut ribbons and kiss babies. And nothing does that better than being able to bring in money from somewhere else to put infrastructure in that you get to put your name on. So, you know, we like to deal with that. You know, I think the thing that you see, though, is that this program starts getting people, once they're involved in it, thinking a little differently. One of the things that we see that, you know, tends to be tenets of some of this, and Lori touched on it, is that you're looking at things from a different lens and you're involving the unusual suspects, as we like to call it. You're bringing in and focusing on things that you normally don't do. Typically, when we've done planning in the past, it's, you know, big picture or, you know, all encompassing. One of the big tenets of looking at this program is that you're focusing on folks that traditionally aren't thought of in the planning process, either from an equity lens or from an age and demographic lens. You know, when I was running the MPO in Albany, Georgia as a pup, I never looked at the demographics in terms of folks that were under 18 or those that were over 65. And boy, we sure didn't care about who was riding a bike or walking to places like some of you in the audience have. But that in essence is the big lens that we're looking at from these. And why? Because it helps support economic development. If I can't get to work, if I can't get to school, if I can't get my kids safely to playing and recreational activities, I'm not in the community I really want to live in. And that's a different switch that people are now thinking through and into. So again, this program is really designed to be broader than just talking about safety. It's really about, it's more, instead of safe streets, it's really about that for all in the SS4A. And we play to that when we're doing it. So I think what you see here in terms of this slide is getting people to think about the mindset of what are you really trying to accomplish with these, and trying to think about things in terms of your planning. And this is something that a lot of small communities haven't done, because again, they don't have the money or resources to start thinking about the traditional planning process that you may be doing when you're working in a larger urbanized area like Atlanta or Augusta or Savannah. This is the stuff that we're introducing to places like Hayhira, Georgia, that haven't had that access to that type of funds. The Sylvester Georges of the world, the Hartwells and Lafayettes that are now getting these types of funding opportunities. So you're having to teach them really about the idea of what should a plan look like and how can it benefit your community. And so some of these principles that you see on here are kind of the things that we try to look at, is hey, again, safety, that North Star. I wish we had used the star instead of, now that I think about it.
I'm going to put it in there.
Using those, looking at those vulnerable users. And again, it's that term of art that the feds had come up with that's really those under 18, those over 65, and those that walk and bike, because they're usually not thought of in the planning process. I mean, even the traditional kind of 4-step model that a lot of urban areas use, you're looking at car users and trucks and things of those natures that are really the drivers in the model versus some of these more specific things. The other thing is the opportunity is that start bringing some innovation in terms of tools and thinking in these communities, because what we find is the good news, the bad news is that because they haven't done a lot of planning, there isn't a lot of data out there. And so how do you blend in things that are happening now? How many of you guys have heard of Replica? Anybody heard of Replica? Okay, we know who the data nerds are. But Replica is a data set from the Alphabet company, which is Google, right? You've all heard of Google. And how many of you have one of these on you? The ultimate tracking device right here, ladies and gentlemen. For those that don't know, they're using information from your cell phone to generate origin, destination, speed information, volumes. They can tell a whole lot about what's going on. And they put this all into a company called Replica, which they sell that information. And there's others. You've seen Streetlight, you've seen other data sets that are out there. But point being is, here's information that typically isn't available that can work at a smaller community, because most small communities, they're not doing 2 counts, right? There may be 1, maybe 2 or 3 DOT permanent count stations in their community. So we're having to find different ways to get information to look at where those accidents are happening and some of the causality. And so things like Replica and Streetlight and really helps to kind of set the tone for looking at that a community may have never seen before.
Sorry, I flipped through a couple of.
Oh, you slipped.
I
Yeah.
flipped through.
Okay. I don't know what's going on over here. I'm just happy I'm here. So in terms of where we're going in terms of this, though, is, the idea of the safety planning lens being the way to help smaller communities get those big wins is thinking through how to put a process together that ultimately starts to help them think about their needs, how safety can be their North Star, and how the safety program can leverage investments that'll help them be a safer and more prosperous community is really the bottom line here.
Mhm.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and
Say that.
Yeah.
I was gonna, bring up Doug as
Yeah.
well, because I know a lot of folks didn't raise your hands about, your own multimodalism. But it's maybe because your infrastructure isn't there and you don't know what it looks like. Well, one of the things that we do in our discussion when we go with and talk to these small communities and help them with their visioning and help them see the possibilities is bring real world examples. And Doug, he's got economic development in his blood, and can tell you about the transformation of Smyrna, Georgia, from a personal perspective.
So, unless you're from Georgia, obviously, so you're probably familiar with Smyrna, Georgia. People look at it today. It's a great place to live. I'm a native. My family has lived in that part of Cobb County since the late 1830s. To give you an idea, that's how long we've been there. And So when I was growing up in Smyrna, back in the 60s and 70s and graduated high school in the early 80s, when I say Smyrna, people will look at you and go like, Smyrna? Like you have some communicable disease or something is what, it just was not considered as a very middle-class, working-class community. Okay. And by the late 1980s, we were in decline. We had a lot of growth after World War II. Lockheed moved to the plant there, Marietta in 1951. Smyrna had 2,000 people living in it. By 1970, had 20,000 people. So a lot of growth, right? And a lot of it post-World War II design. How many 4-lane, 5-lane highways can we stick to, and how fast can we get people to move? And, forget about sidewalks or pedestrians and all that. So by the time that the late 80s came around and we were in this process of going downhill, and what I mean by that is, folks like myself had graduated. They weren't coming back to the community. I stayed, but most of my friends went somewhere else. And on top of that, we had a lot of folks who had retired. It worked at Lockheed, worked at one of the car plants in Atlanta, very middle-class folks who were on fixed income. And their attitude was, hey, don't raise my taxes. Okay. Which meant don't reinvest in the community. But we as a city finally decided we had to do something. And by the way, nobody was going to come rescue us. We're looking for the state or federal government. We had to do it ourselves. The whole point of this is what we looked at, and this was kind of ahead of the curve. And I'll be very frank here. If Smyrna could do it, anybody can do it, to be very blunt. I mean, I grew up with folks in charge. So I went to school with my parents. Nice folks, but I wouldn't say the most creative, innovative people in the world, okay? But what they knew was that we needed to change what type of community we were. And one of the issues was the ability to feel safe and get around and not be totally auto-dependent. And this is in 1990, folks. What you would call new urbanism, which is really just old urbanism, just with the word new in front of it. And is what we started doing. In fact, we wouldn't use that term. I was appointed to the Development Authority when I was 25 years old. I was the vice chair. And our planner kept saying new urbanism. I said, stop saying that because some of our leaders think you're talking about a 40-story tower downtown Atlanta. What it was about was how do you get around a community like you used to pre-World War II, let's say, where you could walk and you felt safe doing it and multimodal. And then we didn't forget about the car. So a perfect example of that is over time, we came up with a plan. Again, this is kind of before what Eric's talking about, but this just came out of our needs to create a safe community. How do you get around? And so we looked at, we had to do road widenings and things like that, but we put in linear parks. We put in, a lot of more friendly pedestrian bicycle paths. We had a long-term plan. Some of this took 20 years to do. But let me tell you, once we started doing it, what changed in Smyrna is suddenly, to Eric's point, was people wanted to live there. But during our initial downtown, which was a true downtown, we never had the square in Marietta like in Smyrna. It was just a bunch of lean-to brick buildings stuck together, right? We built the downtown we never really had. Once we started doing that, within 5 years, we had a $250 million worth investment because people were looking for that walkable community, urban village type style. And we didn't keep it downtown. We had a plan for the whole community. So if you go to Smyrna today, along all our major corridors, there is multi-use paths. There are linear parks. We don't forget about the automobile, but we also try to make sure it's safe for other users, to the point that she's making. Perfect example, the high school I went to, Campbell High School, which is now the building I went to is Campbell Middle School. And nobody walked. I mean, there were some sidewalks, but nobody walked to the school. Nobody. Today, because I lived just down the street still, there's 500 kids walking to school. In the last few years, because we have a 12-foot wide multi-use paths, we have a 4-lane highway going through here. When I was going to school, it was only a 3-lane with a center turn lane. Now it's a 4-lane highway with some turn lanes and medians and things. But when school gets out in the middle school around 4 o'clock, the sidewalks are packed with kids walking home. And here's the point. The parents aren't coming to pick them up. The parents feel safe enough that they can allow their kids to walk because you have an environment that's built to be safe. You don't think about it. And they're riding their bicycles and things like that. So, I mean, that's just an example, a real world example of one, building a community that is based on safety and these type of issues. And then the economic investment it brings because people want to live in that type of community. To show you how dramatic Smyrna has changed in just the last 20, 30 years. When you did our 2000 census, about 25% of the people had a 4-year degree or more. Told you, it's still very middle class, working class community. Today, 52% of the people who live in the city have a 4-year degree or more in less than 20 years. That's a pretty dramatic change demographically speaking in the sense of education. And what does that mean? You've also have a higher income and all those type of things. That's because people want to live there. One of the effects of that is it's pretty expensive now to live in Smyrna if you didn't get a house years ago. But the point is, I'd rather have that problem than the other problem, which is nobody's interested in your community. They don't want to come there. Again, this wasn't like we built massive new roads. We did mainly a lot of multi-use, multimodal infrastructure is what we did because our roads were pretty much widened already at the time we started this. And understand, we were also retrofitting an old suburban community, which is a challenge. So for newer communities, in particular, that's why they need to look at this, is that don't wait around to retrofit like we had to. Everything. I'm going to stop there, but
No, I
Go ahead.
think the kind of in closing, so that we can leave some time for some questions, Smyrna has been a kind of an example for those that are familiar with the Atlanta regional area. There's what I call the children of Smyrna, the Woodstocks and the Cummings and the Swanees and pretty soon John Creeks of the world that are all building this destination downtown for an area at Sandy Springs that wasn't there. Why? The economics of it work. They see how, as a small community, you can gain pretty significant improvement in your community by having someplace safe, secure, that people can walk by, feel comfortable, and live around. And so luckily, there are programs out there now that can help folks that aren't maybe as rich or as affluent. Because again, some of these are going to, SS4A is something that some of the more poorest communities in the country can apply for and use. And so the idea is that everybody can use safety as their North Star, like Smyrna or others that are applying right now to make their community more safe and more prosperous. So we'll stop here and see if there are any questions, comments, debates.
Growing things.
Okay, yes, my question was, because when you were saying, that there are linear parks along the corridors, what do you mean by that phrase, linear park?
yeah, so an example in Smyrna, we had a 4-lane road. Good example is Spring Road in Concord. It comes right out there from Braves Stadium, right there at Mount Parkway, if you know what I'm speaking. You're familiar with the area, and it goes all the way to the western part of the city. So it was widened in 1967. Just 4 lanes, no turn lane, nothing, Great safety, oncoming traffic at all times, right? So in the early 90s, we came up with a program that we needed to shift the road, put a median in, increase safety, stop unprotected left-hand turns, okay? From a traffic, but what we did was we acquired one side. We only took one side. We took everything because state law had changed. See, in the old days, before the late 1980s, you could only buy property that you're actually going to use. So you couldn't buy the whole property. In other words, that's why you had roads built up to people's damn doorsteps, being plotted. If you've seen some of this, it's because used to you couldn't buy any more than you were actually used for the project, but that changed. So we took everything on one side, but then you only had to go one side of the property, not both sides. And then we had all these remnants left. We did this. Then we put in heavily landscaped. They created a buffer to the existing neighborhood behind, and we created a space that you put multi-use paths in, made it a safe environment. You're not a sidewalk right up on the road with a whole bunch of trains. So we were able to move traffic through, but at the same time, we created a recreation space that also was a transportation infrastructure for pedestrians, for walkers, for cyclists. And we did this on its now. It took 20 years as we went through the process of acquiring and doing this road, and we've done this on every road. We're about to do one on South Cobb Drive, State Highway 280.
section we're doing is basically a 7-lane, suicide lane, wide in the mid-1960s, and then it goes down to 5 lanes, 4-lane suicide lane. 1 mile, and we're about to do the same thing, gonna have the boulevard concept. Gonna put, big state right of way, we have like 200 feet of state right of way. So to that point, we've had this plan on all our major transportation corridors as we redo them, is to put in this infrastructure that makes it safe to walk or bicycle or roller. And let me tell you, it has made a huge difference in the sense that people get out and use it. You know, and I've watched that in my lifetime, because nobody walked around Smyrna unless you just didn't have a car. You know? I mean, maybe it's kids like me, we were those free-ranging kids in the 60s and 70s, right? Latchkey kids, just kind of went wherever the hell we wanted to, right? Rode our bicycles around, but we didn't have paths or sidewalks. And, I had a few close calls. Somehow I survived the 1960s and 70s. But to that point, yeah, that's what you're talking about in linear park.
And I just want to make one comment too, that linear parks and these type of features can also be considered in your resiliency planning because they do have climate benefits. Reducing urban heat island could be possibly part of your stormwater system plan. And there's funding pots for these different things if you mark them the way that the funding, the color of the money, so to speak. So, sorry, I know there were other hands. Go ahead.
Mr. Scott, I appreciate your story about Smyrna and how it's successfully reimagined itself. I'm always interested in the ways that it might not have worked so well we don't hear about. Is there anything that went on in all that process you just described, where the city tried something, didn't work, and it got positive side?
In a sense, not really, and here's why. To be very frank. We did a lot of studies. We brought in folks, we really seriously looked at issues about how to do land use. And we took our time. In the sense of what I would call a failure, we tried to get some senior housing in part of the development, and the market just didn't accept it at that time. This had to do with an old shopping center that was taken down. When it was originally built in 1954, Belmont Hills was the largest shopping center in the southeast until Lincoln, 1959. 48 acres. And we had worked with the owner to with incentives using, we had a tax allocation district and help do the public infrastructure and all that. We said, we said we want some apartments here, we want some owner occupied housing here, you put your retail there. We're gonna have senior housing, plus we had to do public school. We're gonna get senior housing. We tried and tried and tried. So finally we rezoned it for owner occupied housing. When I say owner occupied, I'm talking about 3-story with 15 feet between the houses. It's this same single family residential suburban type style housing. So in that sense, we run into some issues there, but the reason we've avoided, I would say, failures is that we have really spent our time doing studies and really having a conversation. And here's the other part, building consensus in the community to have a shared vision on what we're doing. Because as I joke about Smyrna, now I have to have the numbers up, but I tell people it was usually I just call it 25-year overnight success. The point being, we went through multiple elected officials, but since we had a shared vision and we had all worked on it, didn't matter who was in office. I've been a city councilman, state senator, state rep, and I was just recently elected to the DOT. I started my term April 1st, Congressional District 6. So I've been in that arena ever since. And that's the problem I see with a lot of communities is that you have a regime change, let's say, a new regime comes in and says, I don't agree with what we're doing. So the biggest thing we did was spending time in our community building that shared vision. So no matter who came along, everybody said, no, we're going to continue to do that. Because that's what the people want.
That's why I always call Smyrna the exception to the rule. Because most of the things that have worked in Smyrna sometimes don't always apply in the normal real world.
Yeah, that's true.
I was just gonna ask, you said you went from 6 to 4 lanes, did you sacrifice traffic congestion? Is that an issue or?
I'm sorry, you're talking about Oh, no, okay, you talking, when I was talking about Southcott Drive?
Yes.
Oh, well, we're not we're not getting rid of 6 lanes.
Went from 6.
No, it goes, it's a state highway that's wide, it's initially 5 lanes, and it goes to 7 lanes. Meaning you have a suicide lane in the center.
Oh, I thought she.
Yeah, no.
She went down.
No, we didn't actually do it. What we've done on all these multi-lane highways is that we have put in a lot of medians and made it very pedestrian friendly and understanding how people move around, how the issue of interacting with auto traffic. So we're gonna do a boulevard concept for 1 mile between Ponsett Road and Windy Hill Road, South Dot Drive, that's gonna have through traffic. We're finishing this up on Windy Hill Street right now. And then you're gonna have local street lanes taking over. We're gonna take 7-lane highway, create 4 3 lanes along with 2 local streets. You slip in and out. Because we have to deal with all, we don't want to destroy the business folks who were there when the Kirk calls, right? Done in the 1960s. So how do you allow people to still have access? But you're gonna have heavy landscaping and lots of crossings. And we're even preparing, we're gonna land bank a bus line. But some future date, we're talking about a BRT system down that will loop into the managed lanes. We'll fall into the south. The point, and that's the other thing we do, as far as we think long-term. And we try to think about what can happen in the future. And boy, please bank your right away. Because you never, you may not still use it for what you've done. Not forgetting, but eventually, some chances of getting it back in an urbanized area, but we all understand. So, but no, that's what's going on.
Yeah, my question is, when through this process, do you also allocate to, like disadvantaged communities or, low income communities? And because I think you mentioned a lot of like safety concern, but is that also the process? Or how did you implement that?
Yeah, and the great thing about this program is that, particularly from the feds, is that there's a heavy assessment of equity in the process. Again, we talk about those vulnerable road users, but it's also looking at making sure that those that have been disadvantaged in previous things. And so part of the planning process, and if you're doing a Safe Streets for All plan, is there is an equity lens, and you're supposed to do an equity analysis looking at kind of where these, what they call the high injury network, basically kind of AKA your worst offenders, how they impact those low income populations. And usually, surprise, most of those locations are in low income areas or impact low income populations because it's how they get to work. It's how they get to school. It's how they get to recreation if they want to. So yes, it's a very big part of the process. In most of these communities, when you have the adequate time to do it, you spend a lot of focused public engagement in those areas, working with, usually, again, as I was mentioning, those unusual suspects. You're dealing with community leaders that you normally probably aren't involving in the process, church leaders, civic groups that typically aren't on your citizens transportation committee if you're an MPO or folks that you don't normally talk to in the process. And so, if you are engaging in an SS4A, that's one of the key things that the feds are looking at when they're reviewing your plan is, did you look from a lens of equity, and are you using that equity analysis to help shape the program of projects that you're proposing?
What would be a generic first project that gets programmed to construction? This type of programs?
Well, one thing to note is that it's not all construction projects that have to come out of this. There are behavioral programs, there's, public education. So there's implementation and demonstration funds that are available after you do your comprehensive safety action plan. But your recommendations, your next steps, they don't all have to be engineered infrastructure. And typically that's, what we want to recommend is a whole pantheon of opportunities for the community to implement as the funding becomes available, the political will continues. So, some of the more simple low hanging fruit.
So I'll give you the best classic answer I can give you for planners. It depends. Right? And a lot of it depends on the community and timing of things, right? As Lori says, instinctively, you try to look for low hanging fruit, quick projects, lighting, striping, signage are great first step projects that, you can show immediate value by saying you're addressing, versus long-term issues. We've been in communities where the causality of accident is really drainage because you have high steep slopes on sides of roadways that are having run off the road accidents. But you're not going to fix that in a day. And so you set up this kind of program of projects trying to get at things that could be doable, with the funding that people have or the opportunity that's available depending on time and cycle, versus some of those longer term improvements that may actually need, real construction, engineering analysis. Then the other lens that you look at too is who owns the roadway. If I'm Hayhira, Georgia, for instance, I control Hayhira's roads. So I could probably do a project on that if it's on the network versus trying to deal with something on the state highway system. Because I got to deal with DOT and go through their plan development project and all that sort of stuff. So I think where that location is, in terms of ownership, also plays a big role in what gets put in the priority first. We worked on a project where we finished our SS4A plan right around the time that they had a call for demonstration project. So we went out and did it. The first one out the gate that they went after was a lighting program because they have poor visibility and it's causing problems with run off the road. So we went after that. If it hadn't been for the timing of that, it was going to be some marking off of making some roundabouts and doing temporary ones to show some demonstration around places where there are four-way stops now that weren't really working as effectively given all the traffic that's built.
Great. All right. Well, I think we're running up against time here. So thank you to our presenters. Appreciate you being here. As a reminder, before you leave, we have 2 sign-in sheets that are going around. So please sign in so you can get your professional development credits for being here. And then the next session that will be in here at 5 is session 2B, but there are a couple other ones as well. So see y'all back at 5.
To be or not to be? That is the question.
That is the question.